Organised crime gangs are deeply entrenched in Limerick. They have enriched themselves by flooding the streets with drugs, by extorting money from local businesses, and by trafficking in firearms and explosives. In many parts of town, the gangs call the shots.
As a Limerick man, I have to be very concerned about the way the city has degenerated. I represented it for a very long time, and I could see this beginning to happen. And I regard it, if you like, as one of my failures in life, that I wasn't able to stop it.
There seems to be no end to the torment of the Collins family.
There was a grave dug down here at the level crossing to hold a big man. I mean, that's what the Gardaí told me. It was evident that it must have been for me.
64 people have been violently killed in Limerick since the millennium. The Gardaí have solved 54 of those cases. Many of the foot soldiers who have done the dirty work for their godfathers are now in jail. But there is no shortage of recruits. The appeal of the gangster lifestyle is irresistible to some teenagers.
They can put their arms around a 12-year-old and they can show him, bring him in the car and show him a bling life, and they think that these guys then are going to show them a brighter future, like, and they can be influenced so easy. Like. I'm not waiting for John Dundon, Ger Dundon or Wayne Dundon to walk up that car park and do anything to me, because they're cowards, you know. They'll hide behind these kids and get them to do their work, like. But that's what you're looking at, is young kids now starting to go around with Glocks and coked up to the eyes. And I mean, I've seen them there, like, as young as 10, on drugs.
In Limerick, the teenage foot soldiers of the major gangs have been programmed to hate. But the state of war that exists between the McCarthy Dundons, the Keens, the Collopys and their affiliates may not last forever.
At the moment, there are a number of disparate groups that are not controlled by anybody, that are fighting amongst themselves. But if that ever stops and somebody decides, as they did in America back in the good old days, and decides to organise the groups and get them to cooperate with one another, then we've got a very, very serious problem.
2-5.
In the good old days in America, organised crime syndicates like the Mafia gnawed away at the Big Apple. Although the setting couldn't be more different, there are striking parallels between the predicament of Limerick and what happened in New York. In the 80s, violent drug gangs had turned New York into a city of fear. Over 2,000 people were being murdered every year. Many New Yorkers were resigned to their fate. Their city was the most exciting and the most dangerous in America. To save New York, there would have to be a change.
New York, I would say at the time, was being described by many experts as a dying city. Crime was rampant. The homicide rate from the time of the crack epidemic in the mid-'80s, going through the late '80s and into the early '90s, homicides were in the 4 digits.
New Yorkers for decades feared to walk the streets alone. The streets were the domain of predators. Most cars had these ridiculous little signs posted in their dashboard and on their front windows saying, everything's been stolen already, please don't break in. Basically, the criminals ruled the day, and citizens were on their knees begging for exemption from the criminal run.
In 1994, there was a radical change at the top of the New York Police Department when Bill Bratton was appointed commissioner. Bratton had been the chief of the city's transport police and had dramatically lowered crime on the subway. His mission was to bring order to the chaos above ground. Bratton's policy was called the broken windows approach.
Problems in a neighborhood stem very often from quality of life issues. If there's a group of disorderly males on a corner drinking and engaging in in antisocial behavior, if we don't address that problem will not only increase, but it will lead to other problems in the neighborhood. So now we know that the gang members hanging out on a certain corner must be addressed at 6 o'clock at night, because they're gonna do something later at 12 o'clock at night, and it'll probably be a more serious crime then. And when we go to community meetings, the complaint we get is not about a stabbing down the block or somebody who robbed somebody in an armed robbery situation. Very often the complaint we get is the noisy group of men on a corner, the loud radio, the public drinking, the public intoxication, the public urination in the street. When we address those things, we find that the larger issues don't occur because we've addressed the smaller issues.
The key to the success of this new strategy was accountability. Precinct captains were responsible for crime detection in their districts, and their commanders were keeping count.
They would call in precinct commanders. These are the commanders of local policing districts. And they would ruthlessly grill them about the crime that was happening within their precincts. And if that commander didn't have not only a rigorous and minutely detailed understanding of his crime problems, but more importantly, a strategy for solving those problems, he faced demotion and the end of his career. This was a revolutionary concept. It was basically importing private sector ideas of management accountability into a public sector agency.
We went from a reactive police philosophy where basically when someone called 911, we sent a radio car, they handled the problem. We still do that, of course, but now we've shifted to a more proactive philosophy, a more assertive philosophy, where we're targeting the problems at the right time, at the right location, for the right reason.
Limerick is not New York. It is, however, man for man, Ireland's most policed city. But the mood is still ominous. In some parts of Limerick, people are frightened to call the police. Scared to be seen talking to anyone in a uniform. Reluctant to take the stand, no matter how trivial or serious the crime.
Fire Brigade up here to Malley Park, the fire here in the abandoned house up here. Where you have intimidation, widespread intimidation. People fear to report crimes. They fear to be witnesses. And they're right, because what happens is the group of criminal people feel that they actually have impunity. But ultimately nothing can touch them.
Seems to be the stock and trade of the Limerick criminals that they will intimidate the vulnerable witnesses. I have about 12 weeks of criminal trials every year. In every one of those weeks, there will be a case where witnesses will be frightened, will be intimidated.
But certainly, they had no compunction in attacking the organs of the state. Prison officers intimidated, guards intimidated, business people to allow them into their premises to do drug dealing. The state solicitor, his offices were burned out on a number of occasions.
I've had personal difficulties in relation to carrying out the job in the past. I mean, I've had my offices burnt down. It took 12 months to rebuild the office. I had a second attempt at burning down my office. I've had other security problems from time to time.
In Limerick, the major crime gangs have carved out their strongholds, forbidding fortresses where they dominate. Citadels you enter at your own risk.
I just buried my son, and we were followed by the Dundon McCarthy gang down Childers Road, and we pulled in. I was talking to Stephen. They came up alongside and threatened Stephen that they were going to kill Stephen. We lost our head. We followed them, and we were lured into a trap where they had a gang waiting down in Weston. They came over the walls, batons, bottles, chains, And we were lucky to get away because there was a level crossing just in front of us, and we drove away and it was just closing. And the guy seen what was happening and opened it for us to let us through. If he hadn't have, we probably would have been killed that day.
In Limerick, the gangsters have tried to suck the city dry and ruin its reputation. In New York, the criminals know better. Here, the police have reclaimed the city, house by house, street by street, precinct by precinct. The gangs have been banished to the shadows. Homicide has dropped in the last 20 years by 80%. New York has been transformed. Today, it's the safest big city in America, a magnet for millions of tourists.
The transformation of New York was most impressive in the city's poorest neighborhoods like Harlem, Central Brooklyn, East New York. It meant that poor people in Harlem, senior citizens, could walk to the store, shop at night, cash their Social Security checks, and not worry about the drug dealers hanging out on the corner. In New York, we believe it's better to have a police commander sweating bullets than to have actual bullets flying on the streets killing civilians. And that's the bargain we've made.
To get away from the flying bullets in Limerick, Steve Collins was offered a hard bargain by the Garda Witness Protection Programme. A new life in North America for him and his family, but at a price. The surrender of everything he built up and all that he stood for.
We would bring you over, we would take you there, we would get you a place to stay. You change your name, you couldn't tell anyone at home who you were.